Hello garden friends, welcome back. Today I'm showing you 5 things I do for a stress-free garden, or maybe a little less stressful garden. I absolutely love my garden, and I know you do too, but I've talked to so many new gardeners and they plant a garden for the first time. They're so excited and anticipating this incredibly abundant harvest, only to find out that there's a lot of work that can go into it. Maybe it got overrun with weeds, maybe they were having to constantly water it, maybe the pests came in and just sort of wiped everything out. And I completely understand. All of these things happened to me as a new gardener. So over the years, through a lot of trial and error, I have figured out what practices sort of give you the most bang for your buck. Which things that you do in the garden are going to help your garden be a lot more self-sufficient. The first is I feed my soil, not my plants. This is something I always preach to gardeners, because when I stopped putting focus on feeding my plants and started putting more time and energy into feeding and improving my soil, the results were incredible. So how do I feed my soil? Mainly through compost, and I do compost at home. I did actually just put out a whole beginner's guide to composting. I'll link that below, but compost is so incredibly beneficial to your soil. If you have really sandy soil that tends to drain quickly, so you're constantly having to water, the organic matter in compost will sort of act like a sponge and help hold on to more water. If, on the other hand, you have really heavy clay soil, very compacted soil, the organic matter in compost will create more space and allow that water to drain a little bit better. Not to mention, compost is chock full of beneficial nutrients and microorganisms those plants need in order to grow. I usually add my compost in the spring, but in the fall and for the winter months, I usually add an organic matter. This could be untreated straw, it could be shredded leaves, it could be pine needles, and I will let that sit over the winter, and that serves 2 purposes. One, it protects my soil from erosion, from nutrient loss during those harsh winter months, but it also will break down and feed the soil just like compost. Another way I feed my soil is through crop rotation and cover crops. If I'm planting something really heavy, something that draws a lot of nutrients out of the soil, say corn or garlic or onions, then I make sure I follow that up with something that's going to add nutrients back into the soil, usually in the form of something in the legume family. So clover or peas, these are actually plants that will help add nitrogen back into the soil. I also utilize cover crops in beds that I feel like where the soil is just getting a little worn out, or if I'm going to have bare spots in my garden, I also use these to protect any bare soil over the winter. I'll grow these and usually chop them down at soil level when they're finished, and then I can either work in those leaves and stems into the soil, or I can add it to my compost pile. And cover crops are sort of a whole other video, so if you're interested in learning more about growing cover crops in your home garden, then let me know in the comments below. The second thing I do for a stress-free garden is I mulch, and I mulch everything. I mulch my in-ground beds, I mulch my raised beds, I even add mulch to my containers. Mulching your garden can do so many things. It protects the soil, it keeps those roots cooler during those harsh summer months, it helps slow water evaporation so you're not having to water as much, and it suppresses weed growth. I do recommend mulching with an organic matter, so something other than like black plastic, something that will break down and also help feed your soil. So again, you could use chopped leaves, you could use untreated straw. My personal favorite is pine straw mulch because it's a really long-lasting mulch, and a lot of people have pine trees in their yards. As long as those needles are dry and brown and have come from healthy trees, then they are perfectly fine to use in a garden bed. In fact, they are great to use in garden beds. I also sometimes use other plants as sort of a living mulch. So if I'm growing, say, tomatoes vertically, there's a lot of space underneath of them. So I'll plant things like carrots or vining crops like cucumbers or squash or melons to sort of act like a living mulch to cover that soil. This is a really old method. You may have heard of the Three Sisters method, where the corn stalks were grown also as a support for pole beans, but squash was planted on the ground to not only give them more food, but also to help protect the soil and keep down weed growth. I also practice high intensity gardening, so I'm planting things pretty close together so I don't have any open bare spots in the soil. Bare soil, again, is going to be prone to nutrient loss and erosion. It's also places where weed seeds can establish. So when I'm growing plants really close together, then I'm not allowing space for those things to happen. The third thing I do is I cover my plants with row covers as much and for as long as possible. Row covers are one of the easiest ways to protect your plants from pests, both big and small. Rabbits are a huge issue in my garden. They will completely mow down seedlings overnight. So any new seedling that gets planted in my garden gets covered with a row cover. And if my plants don't need to be pollinated, so things like brassicas, broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, or things like onions or potatoes, I will keep them covered until harvest. Even after those plants are established, those row covers will protect them from smaller pests, things like cabbage worms that can really cause a lot of damage to those plants. For plants that do need to be pollinated, things like cucumbers, squash, melons, I will remove those row covers once they start flowering. For plants that are self-pollinating, so things like peas, beans, tomatoes, peppers, they actually do benefit from having pollinators present. You'll often get better and more consistent harvests, so I also uncover those as well. The next thing I do helps protect those plants that aren't under row covers, and that is I companion plant. I mainly companion plant to attract pollinators and to attract beneficial insects that are natural pest predators. And sometimes those insects can do both. In between all of my fruits and vegetables, I plant things like flowers and flowering herbs. These attract things like lady beetles, lacewings, syrphid flies, parasitoid wasps, and soldier beetles. And these are all things that are going to help naturally control those pests. It will also bring in things like bees and butterflies and other great pollinators to help improve my harvest. Some of my favorite things to use as companion plants are dwarf marigolds, dwarf cosmos. I also like to plant herbs and let them flower, things like cilantro, dill, and basil. Nasturtium is another thing I love to plant as a companion plant because it will actually act as a trap crop. This is a crop we're using to actually attract predators to that plant so they're not bothering something else. And nasturtium is a great trap crop for things like aphids and leaf miners. And the last thing I did, and this is what probably saves me the most time, is I installed an automatic watering system. Watering is probably my least favorite garden chore, and when you have, I think I have like 15 or 16 raised beds now, that can take a lot of time. When I did have time to water my garden, it often wasn't the best time of day to water it. The best time of day is early morning or late evening, and a lot of times it was during my lunch break or right after my kids got home from school. Not the best time to water. My garden actually isn't really close to any water spigots, so I was having to haul a really long hose. So I did have some water spigots added to my garden, but if your garden is close, you may not need to do that. I initially had soaker hoses on all of the beds in my raised bed garden, and they worked really well. And I think if you're just starting out or you have a smaller budget, this is a really good option. And I was able to connect multiple beds so that they ran at the same time. But they didn't quite water the entire bed, and they're not all weatherproof, so I was having to pull them up at the end of the winter, add them back out in the spring, and they do tend to crack and split a little easy. Over the last year and a half, I've slowly been switching out my soaker hoses for watering grids. My watering grids are from Garden in Minutes. I absolutely love them. They water the entire surface of that bed, and they're all weatherproof, which means I can leave them out during the winter. I am going to do a more detailed video about this system next month, so be sure to look for that. But whatever watering option you choose, I absolutely love having something on a timer. I don't have to worry about it. It just waters for me. And there you go. Those are 5 things I do to help my garden be a lot more self-sufficient and be a lot less work for me. And again, my name is Jessica. I'm a master gardener in Zone 7, and I make videos aimed at helping beginner gardeners. So if you have anything more that you would like to learn about, learn how to be a better gardener, leave it in the comments below so that I can make content for you. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.